Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the profoundly visceral psychological architecture behind John Green's Looking for Alaska. We are really going to dig into the fascinating mechanics of this story, because what Green does here is brilliant. He takes these incredibly heavy, dense philosophical concepts, like the fundamental nature of suffering, and just drops them straight into the sweaty, awkward, everyday reality of being a teenager. To kick things off, I want you to ask yourself a question. How do you, personally, actually organize your core memories? Think about it. If you ask a historian to measure time, they'll probably hand you a perfectly clean, mathematically precise calendar, right? But if you ask a trauma psychologist how time works, they'll tell you that standard calendar is basically a lie. Human beings just don't experience time in these neat, evenly spaced years. We live our lives in befores and afters. So while mathematical time ticks away cleanly on a page, our psychological time totally fractures and reorganizes itself around big events. This concept actually became hyper-relevant to John Green when he heard a television psychologist observe that Americans would forever organize their memories around a pre- and post-9/11 world. That single passing observation struck a chord. It inspired Green to take this incredibly human concept, indexing our entire lives by our own personal earthquakes, and literally use it as the structural skeleton of his novel. To really get this, you have to look at the intense compression of John Green's own dual real-world trauma at the time. He was under this immense professional pressure from his editor, Eileen Cooper, with a hard, looming deadline of March 1st, 2002. But then, reality just completely caved in. The September 11th attacks happened, and that was followed just days later by a devastating breakup with his long-term girlfriend. This massive one-two punch of trauma paralyzed him into a severe depression, eventually forcing him to take a leave of absence and move all the way back home to Orlando for a daily regimen of therapy. But, structural frameworks alone don't just magically fix your brain chemistry. What actually gave Green the psychological momentum to start writing again was, believe it or not, a bizarre prescription from his boss, Bill Ott. Ott told him to go watch the 1950 comedy movie Harvey. And weirdly enough, it actually helped. It introduced Green to the concept of radical hope. Now, this isn't some naive, toxic positivity. It's an incredibly powerful idea. It's a durable, resilient force that remains available to us through, and crucially, after profound loss. Now, notice the jarring contrast here because it's fascinating. Green takes this immense, powerful concept of radical hope, which was literally born from his own real-world grief, and he hands it to his protagonist, Miles Pudge Halter. But look at the difference. While the creator was drowning in life-altering trauma, Miles is living this completely frictionless, minor life in Florida. He is suffering from an absolute lack of significant life events. It's what we can accurately call total narrative starvation. To truly grasp how utterly void of plot this kid's life is, just look at the painfully hilarious details of his going-away party before he heads off to boarding school. His mom makes a literal mountain of artichoke dip, hangs up these festive green and yellow streamers, and exactly two people show up, Marie and Will. And these are just drama kids he sat with by default. So they're all just standing around making excruciating small talk about Jesus Christ Superstar lighting design. And the saddest part of the whole shebang, Miles fully expected the party to fail because he knows his life is completely empty. But he does have a plan to change all that. When his parents ask why he wants to leave home, he pulls out this quote from the French poet François Rabelais. See, Miles has this incredibly specific, weird obsession. He memorizes the last words of famous dead people. He tells his parents he's leaving to seek a great perhaps while he's still young. He is basically outsourcing his own significance to dead historical figures, just to justify his desperate craving for a life that is larger and more romantic than his boring Florida subdivision. So Miles has built up this super romantic dead poets society ideal in his head, but the physical environment of boarding school immediately and violently shatters those lofty illusions. Just look at the harsh reality of Culver Creek Room 43. It is an unair-conditioned cinder block oven in the suffocating Alabama heat. And the shower? Total humiliation. It's so small and the faucet is mounted so unbelievably low that Miles literally has to stand there completely naked, squatting, just to get his head wet, wondering if John F. Kennedy ever had to shower like this. And this sweaty, undignified reality is exactly the setting when his new roommate violently bursts through the door. Enter Chip Martin, better known as the Colonel. The Colonel is designed to be the absolute structural opposite of Miles. Where Miles is passive and over-intellectualizes life because he's terrified of actually living it, the Colonel is intensely tactical and deeply rooted in harsh realities. I mean, just to fight the crushing boredom of his trailer park hometown, the Colonel spent his entire summer memorizing the countries of the world alphabetically and building furniture out of duct tape. Right away, the Colonel acts as Pudge's guide to the school's brutal socioeconomic ecosystem, which is strictly divided into two camps. First, you have the regular boarders, working-class scholarship kids like the Colonel who survive by relying on absolute, unbreakable solidarity. On the other side, you have the weekday warriors. These are ultra-wealthy kids from Birmingham who essentially just slum it during the week and then drive their Jaguars home on the weekends. The Colonel harbors a venomous hatred for them. But as you dig into this dynamic, you realize his extreme hostility isn't just a simple defense mechanism. It's an aggressive, highly tactical border wall for his own self-preservation. That intense class tension is exactly what creates the single, unbreakable law of the school. No ratting. Because the scholarship kids have zero institutional power, silence is literally their only currency. To show why it's so sacred, a student named Takumi tells the legend of Maria and Paul. They committed what the students revere as the trifecta, the act of being naked, drunk, and smoking a joint all at the exact same time. But they were caught and expelled by the dean, known as the Eagle, solely because someone ratted them out. For the Colonel, breaking that sacred code of silence is the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. So if the Colonel represents gritty, tactical survival, the next person Miles meets represents the complete opposite. Enter Alaska Young. Her room, which she calls her life's library, is this asphyxiating, chaotic mass of waist-high-leaning book towers. She obsessively hoards these potential narratives just to avoid her current reality, insisting there's simply too much living to do right now. You know, things like selling black market cigarettes and dodging the school's violently aggressive pet swans. She is an erratic, intoxicating, and incredibly dangerous mystery. Which brings us to the central thematic clash of the whole explainer. Miles and Alaska are hiding down by the lake, and Miles shares JFK's last words, which carry a very ironic, outward-facing optimism. But Alaska counters with something so much darker. She pulls out a Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel and reads the last words of Simon Bolivar, asking, "Damn it, how will I ever get out of this labyrinth?" It's a stunningly stark contrast between Miles's naive search for a grand outward adventure and Alaska's dark, deeply inward obsession. This idea of the labyrinth is an incredibly sticky philosophical concept. To Alaska, it isn't just about dying. Human existence itself is the labyrinth, and suffering is this inescapable, claustrophobic trap. Now, Miles, who has lived a totally minor, frictionless life, has never really suffered, so he has absolutely no idea how to answer her when she asks if the labyrinth is living or dying. Instead, he makes this clumsy, totally naive teenage wager. If he figures out what the labyrinth is and how to escape it, Alaska promises to get him a girlfriend. But Miles doesn't get the luxury of pondering this abstractly from a safe distance for very long. We are dragged directly into brutal physical shock as Miles experiences a literal manifestation of the labyrinth. In the middle of the night, weekday warriors yank him out of bed, march him barefoot across a gravel soccer field, completely mummify him in heavy duct tape, and hurl him into the pitch-dark lake. And the Colonel, our great tactical genius, he just rolls over in bed to respect the social hierarchy, muttering for them to go easy on him. Right before they slap the final piece of tape over his mouth and throw him into the water, Miles pleads with them. He says, "Please, guys, don't." And as he hits the freezing, dark lake and actually starts to sink, Green gives us this morbidly funny psychological flash. Miles realizes that if he actually drowns right here, "Please, guys, don't," would make for absolutely pathetic last words. I mean, even facing imminent death, his brain completely defaults to his weird historical obsession. Fortunately for Pudge, pure animal instinct takes over. To escape this physical labyrinth, Miles has to completely abandon his intellect and all his lofty romantic poetry. He relies entirely on natural human buoyancy, doing this frantic, armless mermaid swim downward to the muddy bottom. He uses pure kinetic friction against the mud to roll ashore, violently wiggling and thrashing until he can finally rip the duct tape off. He went looking for a romantic great perhaps, and instead got a terrifying, claustrophobic, near-death experience. What happens next tells us everything we need to know about how these characters process suffering. Traumatized and shivering, Pudge goes straight to Alaska for comfort. But look at Alaska's reaction. She just coldly laughs and tells him, "Mommy ain't here." She lacks empathy in that moment because she is deeply entrenched in her own internal labyrinth, utterly numb to her own chronic pain.
Contrast that with the Colonel. When Pudge finally goes back to his own room and tells him what happened, the Colonel absolutely explodes with moral outrage. He realizes that mummifying a kid in duct tape and tossing him in a lake crosses the line from a prank to attempted murder. It reveals his hidden, profound ethical core. So, as we pull all these thematic threads together, we are left with a deeply provocative final thought. We started this explainer with John Green exploring radical hope, the idea that hope remains accessible no matter how suffocating the darkness gets. But after seeing Miles literally bound in duct tape, sinking into the mud, it forces us to reevaluate his entire quest. Is the Great perhaps actually some grand romantic destination out there in the world? Or is it simply the visceral survival we just witnessed? Maybe the greatest adventure isn't a place at all. Maybe it's just finding the friction to wiggle free and the strength to survive the labyrinth. What do you think?